Alrighty, as a reward for hitting our 13,000 subscribers during the 2024 subathon thing, we're doing a faction build guide for each faction. It's not alphabetical, but I'm going to start with Skaven because I haven't lined up a guest yet, and I need a video for tomorrow and yada yada. Anyway, I don't need a guest to do the Skaven build guide. What's a build guide? Well, here's the thing. The reason I haven't done this before is it annoys me to think of this concept because you'd have to redo it with every patch that comes out. So what we're going to do instead is highlight every unit's role barring some big patch, and then at the very end talk about what I currently run on this patch. It'll make more sense as I go through it, but at first we're going to try and stay generic, and then I'll get specific. Right, okay. So Skaven, their identity, no matter what patch it is pretty much if your lord dies, the rest of your army is mega fucked. You're an incredibly weak faction leadership wise, and if you lose your lord, it's very easy to succumb to terror and just routing off the map constantly. So your lord has to be protected. Now, this either goes with taking a fast lord with regeneration, either the warlord or throt on his brood horror, Ikit Claw, or the warlock master on their doom wheels / doom flayers for more speed and more HP, or going with the gray seer on his bell mount where he gets decent HP, spell resistance, and incredible leadership, so he's not going to rout. Right, that's a big reason why you don't see Queek, Tretch, or the Master Assassin often, is because their tiny health pools make it actually much easier to kill them. And you sometimes see Deathmaster Snitch because he can be stealthed whenever he's not in a fight he doesn't want to be in, and he can use Whirl of Weeping Blades or Deathmaster Sigil to get himself out of bad situations. So that's the reason you only ever see Deathmaster Snitch as your Footlord in most cases. So when you're picking your Skaven Lord, survivability is mostly what you're looking for. You're not exactly looking for damage. Now, Ikit Claw in the current patch, but again, we're speaking more generally, Flensing Ruin gets him out of a lot of bad situations because it's really overpowered currently. But most of the time, Ikit Claw himself, even with Flensing Ruin, doesn't want to stay in a fight. He wants to constantly run around, maybe tear out some pockets of weakened infantry, but like he wants to avoid all monsters, all cav, all duelists, so he just wants to keep moving. Generally, that's the same with the Warlock Master. Generally, that's the same with the Grey Seer. The Warlord and Throt, a little bit more with their Brood Horror mounts, want to take fights and then back off and regenerate. But again, you're mostly using them for their extra speed and their regeneration for the Brood Horror mounts, not as combatants. Like, they don't beat anyone as combatants. They won't beat Archaon. They won't beat Wulfric. They just kind of run around and stay alive. Skrulk is another one you see sometimes. He has a higher HP pool than the other Footlords. You can see he has like 700 more health than Snitch, 1,000 more than Master Assassin. But the main thing is if anybody tries to fight him in melee, Rod of Corruption plus, I guess, Plague or Pestilent Breath or even his summons, he just punishes people for trying to blob on him too hard. He's still very weak getting spell sniped, but he's not as weak getting melee sniped as some of the other lords. So you're picking a Skaven Lord, you usually want to aim for their tankiness one way or the other. The Grey Seer offers global support, so you'll take him with wide builds, while Snitch and the Brood Horror and Throt and whatever offer a little bit more melee prowess. And then you would take Skrulk or Ikit if you don't care about the rest of your army, but you just want a Spellcaster Lord. You know, do a little bit more damage here and there, because they both have better damaging spells than the Grey Seer does. Heroes! I know that was kind of a ramble about the Lords, but heroes factor into what Lord you should pick, so we'll get back to the Lords. Heroes are entirely supportive on the Skaven roster. None of their heroes are worth it for as combatants. Like the Packmaster is a not very good combatant. Again, on a Brood Horror, he's not that good of a duelist. He is good because he buffs up Molder monsters that are usually surrounding him. He's good because he's fast and tanky and has healing. He's good because he can support another Brood Horror Lord, but he's not like good on his own. The regular Assassin provides Assassin's Trophy, which is he can't exploit because he has pretty shit melee stats, like non-armor piercing weapon strength is pretty bad and he's a foot character. But Assassin's Trophy can debuff a lord that's surrounded by Rat Ogres and make the Rat Ogres hit him harder, or have Halberds hit him harder. And Rival High Talisman is really good for breaking a front line, right? You have Sorcerers. Two of them have Mortis Engine effects. One of them goes invisible, so they're just sneaky casters that want to cast. And then you have Gorich, who's the closest to actually being a viable combatant, but he's even still not. His duelist stats are really hard to use correctly because he's a fucking mutant rat ogre model, and mutant rat ogre models are some of the worst in the entire game. So again, Gorge is okay as part of a hero hammer, but he doesn't really do anything on his own. Like if you run him off isolated, he'll just die instantly. So what lord should you choose and what hero should you choose? It depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to slow down the game, assassins are really good at slowing down the game with their Rival Hide Talismans. that stops a front line from breaking. Chieftains are okay if you also want to hedge your bets a bit against getting lord sniped, though in land that's stronger domination. In land battles, I really don't like the idea of planning on having your lord die, because that's your loss condition, and it's like you could kind of mitigate it, but it's still bad, so I wouldn't use the chieftain for that. Anyway, you'll pick the Packmaster if you need mobile support. You'll pick the Assassin as if you need your box to last longer. Like I said, he can use Rival High Talisman and really slow down rushes like Greenskins and stuff. So Packmaster is mobile support. Assassin is a box or blob support. And the casters are just, you literally only want to take a caster if you're taking one of the melee lords. Okay. When do you take a caster and when do you take a melee lord? I know this has been rambling. This is where I start to focus up. You have multiple options. Skrulk is pretty snipeable. Ikit is pretty snipeable. Greyseer, less snipeable than those two, but he's pretty snipeable. Those are your three main caster lords. If you're taking the Greyseer, don't take a hero caster at all, because they're just gonna, I mean, you took the Greyseer to not be snipeable. Ikit and Skrulk, I also wouldn't take a caster hero, but you can maybe try and be cheeky and take like one spell in Skrulk, one spell in the caster, but usually no. If you're taking Skrulk, Ikit, or the Greyseer, I wouldn't even take any heroes. You just want to have a super wide army. The caster heroes really come into effect when you're trying to take Snitch, Throt, or the Brood Horror, because you're dividing your opponent's attention. They can keep trying to snipe these tanky or sneaky melee lords, or they can snipe your usually very obvious casters, because the Eshin Sorcerer is not usually taken. Plague Priest is pretty tanky. He can take his Scrying Stone or his Plague Furnace. So he's tanky, he's hard to kill, but he's there. Warlock Engineer is pretty easy to get to route, but he's a foot character who's hard to actually keep hitting, and his Warp Stone armor does damage while you try and chase him off. So you have these pain-in-the-ass casters to get rid of, or you can snipe the Lord, who's usually faster in generating or hiding if it's Snitch. So you usually want to take a caster lord and a melee lord if you're in a matchup where you're worried about your lord dying. Like, it is going to happen. They are going to snipe my lord. Think Nurgle, think Warriors of Chaos, think, honestly, Vampire Counts, think Tzeentch. Those are things where you want your lord and your caster separated. It makes it much tankier. And you don't kill two birds with one stone. Because if you have Skrulk and no heroes, I mean, if they kill Skrulk, they kill your caster and your lord, and the game's just over. It's GG. So Skrulk's only good when your opponent is entirely melee focused. I really like Skrulk versus Khorne. Skrulk versus Khorne is very good. But that's because Khorne doesn't have Rants of Visitations or Spirit Leech to kill him out of range. They have to come kill Skrulk in melee. So there's that. Trying to make this generally not patch dependent. Skrulk is good if your opponent has to come kill you in melee. Ikit Claw is good if you're dealing with enemy blobs or you just want to stay mobile. Greyseer is good if the enemy's going to try and kill you with spells. And any of the melee lords are good if the enemy has very guaranteed lord snipe and you just want to make them work for it. For the rest of your army, oh boy. Skaven Slaves are hard to justify in Game 3. Their leadership's just too low. I've honestly been skipping Skaven Slaves and feeling a lot better. The one powerful use that Skaven Slaves have is sitting on Warp Lightning Cannons. When you have Warp Lightning Cannons or Plague Claw Catapults, if you put Skaven Slaves mixed with their crew, it's very hard to get damage onto the crew, and the Skaven Slaves just kind of get in the way of cavalry charging. But as a frontline, they're entirely worthless. Your frontline, if you intend to lose, you need to take Clan Rat Spears, usually with shields for the extra melee defense, because something people don't appreciate is you have strength in numbers, so your melee defense is actually 36 at first, and you have charge reflection, so Clan Rat shields can hold fine. If you want to lose, but lose slowly, then you can also take Clan Rats regular. I wouldn't bother with Clan Rats as shields, because if you're not having the melee defensive spears, then what's the point? Like, don't waste a bunch of money doing nothing. But anyway, you can have 8 Clan Rats for a front line if you're intending to lose it slowly, and then you could have a bunch of range units behind them. If you want to win the front line, Plague Monks are good versus enemy factions with low armor, like Tomb Kings, honestly, Vampire Counts, but zombies are pretty easy to kill anyway, but yeah. Tomb Kings, Vampire Counts, Norska's fine, Beastman's fine to take Plague Monks, but if you want a winning frontline, Plague Monks against low armored peoples and Storm Vermin versus high armored peoples. Now, Storm Vermin don't have armor piercing either, but their increased armor usually just makes them tanky, and their 160 model count makes them actually decent melee combatants at 950. I wouldn't recommend mixing them, because that's just too much money into your frontline. Even if you're rushing a frontline like this, is too expensive. So either if you're doing the Plague Monks, take 3 Plague Monks and like 2 or 3 Clan Rats, and that's your frontline. If you're doing the Storm Vermin thing, take like 2 Storm Vermin and then some Clan Rats, and that's fine, because your Storm Vermin will punch through. The Clan Rats will just kind of hold for a bit. Death Runners are hyper-specific, but they can be pretty good. Take them versus heavy armored infantry factions. Don't bother against cavalry. I know that there's like cheeky, oh, I can reduce their armor by 50%. Nah, dude, it's not worth it. Like, cavalry just run these guys over real bad. So only take them versus armored infantry factions. Chaos Dwarves. Warriors of Chaos, you can like sprinkle 1 or 2 in. They kind of fuck with Sigvald, and especially Aspiring Champion rushes. People like to take Aspiring Champions versus you. Death Runners are pretty good at countering that, but you only want 1 or 2. Death Runners are a supportive unit. I know it seems weird to say that, but their Weeping Blades really helps other units also deal damage, especially in the late game. So you only want 1 or 2. You don't want your whole army to be Death Runners. It's a funny haha meme, but if you actually want to win games, no. Even 2 Death Runners is a lot, but 1 or 2 is fine. Triads, I just struggle to see them doing very much. Honestly, they're just too bad. Their armor's too low, their mass is too low, their model count's too low, and their health is too low. The main problem is unless here's the dichotomy of the Ashen Triad, in my opinion. If you are braced, so you don't take charge damage, your opponent has to fuck up to run into you. Right? Because if the enemy cavalry doesn't see you, it's probably trying to get past you, and then it'll run into them, but it won't take charge reflection because the cavalry isn't charging you, it's just walking into you. Then a fight ensues, and your opponent will see that and walk away, taking minimal damage. If they do see you, they'll just walk around you, right? So for the Ashen Triads to do what they need to do, the opponent needs to see you braced, charge you anyway with heavily armored cav, and then stay there and die. That doesn't seem likely. And if big monsters charge through them with all the collision attacks that have been added to the game, Ashen Triads just get murdered. So generally, I think Ashen Triads are pretty fucking bad. Might as well just take Death Runners if you want the Weeping Blade so bad. I don't know. Stormvermin and Halberds are all right. They're very specific. They're very, very specific. But if you're not rushing, Stormvermin and Halberds are pretty terrible at rushing. But if you're playing defensive versus a faction that's going to use a lot of monstrous infantry versus you, like Ogres or Beastmen or something, I like sprinkling in 2 Storm Vermin with my front line of Clan Rat Spears, because then you'll really hold and you actually do some serious damage. Plague Monk Sensor Bearers have the same issue for me as I kind of described with Ashen Triads. They seem good on paper, but they just don't have the staying power. You generally only take them if your opponent is going to try and melee grind you out. If they have no infantry clearing spells on their entire roster, if they have no ranged units, and if they have very little cavalry, then Plague Monk Sensor Bearers are good. But that list of factions is pretty much non-existent, so I generally think they're just trash. One thing is Council Guard. I like throwing the Council Guard in the front line sometimes. They're literally unbreakable, so it just fucks with your opponent's rush. But that's it for the infantry. If you want to play defensive, Clan Rat Spears. If you want to play offensive, Storm Vermin or Plague Monks, depending on who you're fighting. And if you want to play hyper defensive, I like mixing in some Halberds here and there. Right. Now, missile infantry, when you're building your build, you generally want to think about what you're trying to accomplish with these missile infantry, what sort of things you're trying to kill. Slingers of any kind are good versus low armor, monstrous infantry type units. Think Chaos Spawn, think Beastmen, Minotaurs, think Razor Gore herds, think trolls, things like that. You generally want to go with Skaven Slave Slingers though, because Night Runner Slings, you're paying over double for 5 more missile strengths. You're paying over double for a less than 50%? Yeah, about a 50%. 50% damage increase, you're paying over double. And the extra melee stats just don't fucking matter. Like, they're still terrible. 14 melee defense and 10 armor is not going to save you from dogs. So the dogs are going to rip them apart just as easily as the Skaven Slave Slingers. And if you go all the way up to Gutter Runners, you're paying 3.5 times as much for double damage. And then still your melee stats are so fucking dog shit that if dogs find you, you're just going to die anyway. So no. Any of the slings besides the Skaven Slaves are a joke. Now maybe a future patch changes that, but generally it's a joke. The 360 shooting versions are amazing, don't get me wrong, but that's because they can serve an entirely different function, which we'll get to. So speaking of shooters you need to defend, Skaven Slave Slingers are generally your best bet. Warp Fire Throwers, they're actually more of a miner with blasting charge type unit. You generally want to mix them into your front line and have them use their oppressive burst damage and they're discouraged from burning people to get like low leadership factions to rout. They're okay versus like greenskins, dealing with their trolls and stuff. Warriors of Chaos sometimes okay. Undead sometimes kind of okay. They're not great on this patch, but that is their function. So you don't actually treat them like globes. You mix them into your front line. You don't keep them behind your front line. So for stuff you're actually trying to protect, it's Poison Wind Globes, it's Slingers, it's Jezzails, it's Mortars, it's Rattling Guns. Globes, generally great. The Death Globe Bombardiers just do way more burst damage than the Poison Wind Globes currently do, but on the current patch, the difference isn't enough to justify paying more. And you know these guys are going to get sniped out, so having like 3 or 4 650 globes is more worth it than having 2. Like, I think this is equivalent. Yeah, that's 1950 instead of 1800. But having these 2 death globes, it's like, all right, 1 Fate of Buna for 1, and then an Empire Knight charges the other, and they're both dead. Whereas these globes, you still have 1 surviving globe. And if any of your globes stay and keep throwing, they can pay for the 2 that died. Whereas death globes, you're just too narrow. Both are good, like, individual units. It's just everyone who's fighting against Skaven is ready to kill globes, so why take expensive ones? Rattling guns are good anti-air or anti-large unit, more specifically large single entities. They're okay versus monstrous infantry. They're okay-ish versus cavalry. They're dog shit versus infantry. They do absolutely nothing versus infantry, but they're anti-big monster. Giselles, anti-enemy artillery, anti-enemy archers, anti-infantry, and they do okay versus cavalry and monsters, and they do very decently versus single entities. So they're just kind of good all-rounders, and that is why you tend to see Giselles a lot. The main problem with Giselles is Fate of Buna is very strong on the current patch, so they just die to 1 spell cast, and there goes 1,000 gold. Whoopsie daisy. That's pretty brutal. And Death Magic is super easy to come across, but Giselles still generally a strong unit if your opponent isn't going to bring Death Magic. You tend to see them a lot. Very defensive, though, because you can't rush with them very well. Skaven don't have the best mobility support, so keeping Giselles online, you usually need a box or a defensive formation. Poison mortars are okay. They harass enemy cavalry and infantry quite well. Usually you'll just see the avalanche mortars, death mortar ROR, because it's way better than this one. But honestly, I think the 1050 ones are fine, even on the current patch. It's just that the avalanche mortars are so much better that you might as well just take those. But yeah, pretty good at clearing out anything with multi-entities. So then that takes us to a very different function, Night Runners and Gutter Runners. Night Runners and Gutter Runners are ranged units that actually buffer and block. They create space. They don't deal damage as much. They do decent damage versus flying units, but you generally just want to mix them into the sides and have them support your wolf rats and rat ogres against enemy cavalry. They're pretty good at that. They're generally not worth enemy cavalry's time to fight because they're still super cheap. Like 450 and 700 gold is not a lot. 700 gold is like, what, a boar boy? Pretty much. Boar boys are 650 on this patch. So you generally just annoy cavalry with these guys, get in their way, throw shurikens at them. If the cavalry want to ignore you, shoot them in the back, or just get under their feet and stop them from getting to your back line. If flyers try and go over you, you punish them really heavily by throwing up into them. And you can help rat ogres out by being bodies beneath their feet, because rat ogres, like, the entire Ogre Kingdom's roster has the same thing. Monstrous infantry likes to fight on top of nearby allied infantry, so you're bringing infantry to a cav fight and helping the rat ogres out a lot. These guys are just annoying, cheap and chipper, and they're fun. And in the late game, when they have low leadership and low HP, you can switch them to being ranged units and just start skirmishing around. Like if a late game comes to a couple single entities, you can have these guys on the near side throwing at them and just harassing them. So they're always useful, especially if you have a couple poison variant sprinkled in there. But they're not things you protect. They protect you. You don't protect them. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Monsters and beasts. Wolf rats are some of the highest DPS dog units in the entire game. They're very good, but their leadership is absolute ass, and that is intentional. They are only good when they are charging something. They are not good at taking an honest fight of any kind. So you usually use them against enemy archers or to support rat ogres. But if you are using them to support rat ogres on your flanks, you want to let the rat ogres take the charge, or night runners or gutter runners. But something else needs to take the charge, and the wolf rats need to come in and shank whatever it is from behind. Or maybe not literally behind. You don't just have to literally get rear charges, but like charge them in second, and then they just start putting out a ton of DPS without taking the charge damage. That'll usually rout them. Rat ogres are your backbreakers. There's a reason you see 4 of them in every build. They're rather cheap and chipper, but they're also one of the Skaven's only ways to get mass. And as I was saying, it's like Eshin Triads get run over by cavalry and take a ton of damage. Dogs get run over by cavalry and take a ton of damage. Night runners get run over by cavalry and take a ton of damage, but they're cheap 450 infantry, so who gives a fuck? Rat ogres are the first thing we're talking about that doesn't get run over by infantry and take a ton, run over by cavalry, sorry, take a ton of damage. That's why you see 4 of them in every build. They need to stop the mass from coming in. Whether you're charging the enemy or whether the enemy's charging you, like, let's pretend you're even rushing. You don't have poison globes or anything. You still don't want your storm vermin getting raffle stomped by cavalry over and over again, cycle charging them. You don't want Ikit Claw getting caught out by cavalry and then he can't move, and Boris Todbringer, someone flying, jumps in on him and kills him. Like, You just need rat ogres. They're strong, they do a lot of damage, good armor piercing, and they're bodies to help control the pace of the game and not just leave yourself hopeless as a wave of infantry gets cycle charged to death. So you need rat ogres. They're good. They're not as great as you'd think they are, surrounding a single entity and beating it to death. They do okay, but unless you have the assassin offering Assassin's Trophy or whatever to debuff it, their stats just aren't really there to surround a single entity and beat it to death. They're mostly anti-cavalry. Brood Horrors are currently terrible, but when they're good, it's usually when they can run around and offer terror at a cheap price point. And again, they can generally heal themselves up. The biggest problem for them is their low leadership, and high speed actually tends to lead them to routing directly off the map, leaving you high and dry. But they can be okay as like mobile support. Generally, they're better as mount options for people that have higher leadership than the base cost. Mutant Rat Ogres are generally terrible, but when they are good, it is as a duelist, not versus infantry-sized characters, as it would have you believe by saying anti-infantry. Their animation set is terrible for fighting infantry. Like, they have one where they literally jump over an infantry target and will miss it every time. Doesn't matter how high your melee attack is. They'll just miss because they physically don't make contact with it. They're decent at dueling enemy horse characters or larger than that, just because you can fit two of them side by side pretty easily. They have small models, so if they're 2v1ing some guy, then they'll usually beat him up pretty bad. Horse Car's Helling the same way. Hell Pit Abomination is also generally terrible, but when it's not, maybe there's a buff for it in the future. It's tanky. It is actually quite tanky, and it does decent damage to another large target if it can see it. Its main problem, again, is its animation set. It tends to turn its back on something to do this tail whip attack, but that does present its backside to something, so it takes leadership penalties for being attacked in the flank, and it takes melee defense penalties for getting hit in the flank. So it keeps debuffing itself because it wants to turn around and hit somebody with its tail. Fuck that! Use your stupid giant claws! Ugh, I hate this thing. But if its animation set ever gets fixed, yeah, it's a decent enemy duelist. It's so low speed, though, that it's going to be a bodyguard for your lord rather than an aggressive thing. It's not going to be able to take the fight it wants, so it's just got to be sitting where your opponent wants to be and force your opponent to come to it. As for your artillery, Plague Claw catapults are mostly anti-infantry, kind of anti-cavalry. Warp Lightning Cannons are mostly anti-single entity, kind of anti-cavalry. Kinda. But Plague Claws do literally nothing to single entities, and Warp Lightning Cannons do literally nothing to infantry. So it's like, they each have their niche that they're very good at, and then they have kind of a secondary, but both of them are kind of good versus cavalry. Doomflayers only recently got good, but they are just chariots. They're great versus infantry, can plow through infinite armored infantry. Doomflayers specifically do okay versus non-armor-piercing cavalry, but I think that is more of a current patch thing than a true identity for this unit. But they're good in Skaven rushes now. They're the other source of mass behind Rat Ogres that can actually get in the way of stuff. So in a lot of rush builds, which we'll get into in a second, a lot of my current rush builds have 4 Rat Ogres, 2 Doomflayers. Doom Wheels are similar to Brood Horrors. If you are on a patch where this thing is tanky and it provides cheap terror, then yeah, it can be useful in a rush. If you are on a patch where this thing dies easily, then no, it's garbage and useless. Okay, that was a lot of vaguisms and generalisms, but that is generally what each unit on this roster is supposed to do. Some things that a lot of people don't know that I feel like was useful to take away from this, if you listen to this ramble for this long, is Warp Fire Throwers are better in the front line than in the back line. That Night Runners shouldn't actually be inside your defensive formation, they're on the outsides. And Death Runners are a support unit, not a mainstay. So let's talk about some actual builds. Let's build one from the ground up. I'm going to just set a random enemy. Grand Cathay. Okay, so we're rushing them, right? Grand Cathay doesn't have a lot of Lord sniping spells, so that means my infantry-sized lords are on the table. It can save me some money. Actually, infantry-sized lords are preferred because Zaytang the Watcher exists, and he does a lot of damage to my larger targets. Infantry are easier to dodge that sort of thing by putting them in trees or behind some terrain. And cannons. Grand Cathay cannons are very, very strong against large things. So generally, I'll take Snitch. Skip Slippery because I don't need the extra melee defense. Keep Cloak of Shadows, keep all these. Yeah, actually I'm going to skip. No, I'll keep Deathmaster Sigil. But the main point is with Zaytang around, Snitch's stealth's going to be helpful. Unless Zaytang takes, what is that thing? Master of the Stone Legions. No, does he have default that thing? Watched by the Watcher? God, he has it by default. He can see everybody who's stealth. Fuck. Okay, I was going to stay stealth for that. If that's not the case, then we have to go with one of our bruiser buddies, because there's just too much sniping. So I'm going to go with the warlord, and I'm going to cut everything except for rally, just give him a little bit more leadership. And now I'm only 1350. I have a whole health pool, and I can regenerate up. Now, since we're taking him, we need a caster hero. We're going to go with the warlock engineer on the current patch. Take his mortis engine, so you can just train down Jade Warriors or Jade Lancers that want to chase him down. Take Flensing Ruin, cut everything else, because you know he's going to get sniped. So you're just casting Flensing Ruin whenever you can onto Zhao Ming, Zaytang, whoever their lord or hero is of import. All right, so we have our cheap and tanky lord. We have our cheap caster that's probably going to get sniped immediately, but if he's getting sniped, the lord is not. Versus Grand Cathay, there's two different ways you can go. We're not here just to talk about Grand Cathay, so we're going to do a generic rush build, right? Rushing. All right, Grand Cathay has decently high armor, so I'm going to throw in a couple Death Runners, a couple Storm Vermin. I'm going to throw in one Death Runner. Nah, two's okay. Yeah, two's okay. Okay, Death Runners and Storm Vermin makes a good front line. We have some Clan Rats. Cool, cool. We are rushing. Let's grab 3 Rat Ogres, 2 Doom Flares. I'm running out of money pretty quick, so I'll do 1 Doom Flare. 4 Rat Ogres to pile over the top. I'm rushing, and I know I'm going to be any shot at. Globes can't really keep up, and if they do, they're going to nuke my own Death Runner Storm Vermin front line. So that's not really that helpful. Like, even if they throw, they're just going to hit my own guys. So, skip that. I'm going to grab 1 dog, because if I can sneak it into their backline and get it onto archers or their cannons, it can be high value, but I'm not going to take too many more than that. Because if they go just heavy Jade Lancers, Peasant Long Spears, and rush me, there's not a whole lot for the dogs to do. Because of Croman, I want 2 Night Runners just to offer a little bit of anti-air support. And then with 500 gold left, could grab a 3rd Night Runner, downgrade 1 of these into 2 Skaven Slave Spears. Nah. Oh, I can almost get... If I could find 25 more gold, I could have 3 slaves. Whatever. I'll just downgrade you and get 2 shielded Clan Rats just for the money. So I take the slaves, because if I get something routing, I can use slaves to chase it off, and then 125 gold slaves are chasing off like 350 gold Peasant Long Spears or 500 gold Jade Warriors or something. But this is generally a rush build. You would want to send your Clan Rats and Storm Vermin in first, Death Runners in second, so that, you know, all the shots are going at these Clan Rats and Storm Vermin. These guys don't get spotted right away. And then they can support the Clan Rats and reduce the armor of whatever the Clan Rats are fighting and help them out with that. Night Runners want to hang around the flanks and just harass Onyx Crowmen that are up in the sky, or Long Marauders that are up in the sky. Just be a nuisance and stop them from getting rear charges on your Death Runners for free. Rat Ogres and Doom Flayers layer over the top or countercharge enemy cavalry. Like I said, dogs wait for that one key moment to get in the backline and get like thousands of value. And if you lose one, not a big deal. But don't rush your dog in too far ahead. This should be generally what I do versus Grand Cathay. So that's an example of a Skaven rush build. For a defensive build, let's try a faction that we know is going to rush us, Beastmen. All right, so Beastmen are coming in. Cool. They have Traderkin. They generally don't have a lot of Lord Sniping. So we can do a Grey Seer, because their only Lord Sniping is in spells. They might just spam Flock of Doom, but you never know. Beastmen have extremely low leadership, so we're going to keep Musk of Fear, because I want to just spam that out as much as possible. I'm also going to keep Potence of Verminous Doom. So if anybody gets near me and I cast a spell, they're taking -8 leadership. And then with my Screaming Bell, Wall of Unholy Sound gives my guys more leadership near me. So it's just kind of a leadership game against a low leadership rush faction. Since I want to keep spamming out as many spells as I can to constantly deter these guys from getting to me, and also they probably have Malagor Dark Omen, we can go Warp Lightning or Howling Warp Gale. I would just do both, honestly. Some people like to do Warp Lightning and then Dreaded 13th if you want one big explosion on the front line. It's also fine. It's generally not how I like to play it, but it's also fine. If that is the case, don't cast Warp Lightning until you get your first Dreaded 13th off, because even with Arcane Conduit, you're going to recharge Winds of Magic pretty slowly, so you're not going to get this off when you need to if you're casting spells right away, which is why I usually like to go with Warp Lightning and Howling Warp Gale. You just cast a fuck ton of spells and be like generally supportive. Global buffs and debuffs all the way along. All right, to break up the Beastmen charge, let's grab an Assassin, take everything off of him except for Rival Hide Talisman. And I just want to keep him in the front line, wherever the Minotaurs are going to hit hardest, and then pop Rival Hide Talisman right away. Reduce their melee attack to nothing and just completely stonewall their advance. Don't bother with Assassin's Trophy, because if they take Torox, his melee stats are too good for Assassin's Trophy to matter. If they take Malagor, which is the current Meta Lord, he's never going to be in melee, so this is just worthless. So just take the Assassin for Rival Hide Talisman. For your front line, we're going to lose, and we know that, so let's grab Skaven Slave, Clan Rat Spears and Storm Vermin. We might grab the Council Guard if I have money, but I'll deal with that when I have time. 3 Skaven Slave Slingers to deal with Chaos Spawn or Minotaurs just poking at them a bit, but also you can position them to block Centigores from getting your Poisonwind Globes. Then you can have Poisonwind Globes. Poisonwind Globes should aim at the Centigores or big blobs of Infantry and Minotaurs if you can, but mostly you want them as counter Centigores. Night Runners and Gutter Runners do okay at peeling off those Centigores we discussed earlier. Rat Ogres are always pretty solid. And then we can get 2 Wolf Rats because Beastmen are so low armored that Wolf Rats getting a charge on Centigores will get a lot of damage out. That'll be pretty good. We don't have the extra money for Storm Vermin Halberds, so instead we can just give our front line some chevrons and keep them in the game. Something like that. So that's an example of a defensive build. Another example of a defensive build is if we fight like something like Tzeentch. That does change the calculus a little bit. Now again, I'll go with Grayseer. They have a lot of spell sniping, but on his belly is a good actually armor and health count, and that spell resistance is very good versus Tzeentch, because you know they're going to be spamming blue fire at you. Again, the spells of ruin are good. All these are good because Tzeentch probably has a ton of flying units. They don't like having their leadership sapped, especially if they're using demonic units, but this time I would definitely go with just Howling Warp Gale and Warp Lightning, because they have flying units that are really going to fuck with you, so if you can lock down Furies, that'd be solid. So you're going with the Grayseer again. I wouldn't bother with any other heroes against Tzeentch, because you know they're going to try to outshoot you. Speaking of which, let's grab 2 Warp Lightning Cannons in case they have a Soul Grinder and a Blue Firecaster. They can kill one, they can't kill both before you get a bunch of return damage. If they have a flying Blue Firecaster, shoot the fucking Soul Grinder. Soul Grinder is a lot harder time dodging these guys than the Flyer does, and if you waste your time shooting something that's dodging you, the Soul Grinder is going to keep sniping out Warp Lightning Cannon models, and you're going to die pretty quick. We'll grab 2 Skaven Slave Spears to sit on top of the Warp Lightning Cannons. Like I said, it just makes them survive a lot longer. For the front line, they're probably going to have Blue Horrors, maybe Forsaken, maybe, but Clan Rat Spears will suffice. They'll lose, but they'll suffice for now. Globes are good against Chaos Knights, against Doom Knights of Tzeentch, against Blue Horrors. If they run out of ammo and run up towards you, they're just generally good. You always want to have a couple to keep your enemy more honest. With the Warp Lightning Cannons offering a bunch of protection, you can go with the Avalanche Mortars. Because if the Soul Grinder or the Blue Firecaster waste time shooting the Avalanche Mortars, they're just going to get shot to shit by your Warp Lightning Cannons. But this is more than enough damage. So let's finish out this build, but there's a different way to do this. You want some Rat Ogres for some mass, and then we just need some more bodies around, so we need to find a way to be cheaper. Could go with 3 Night Runners here, and that would be pretty decent, because Rat Ogres can be busy peeling stuff with mass, and Night Runners can peel Flyers like Furies. That's fine. Also, your Avalanche Mortars can help thin out the Knights before they hit your Rat Ogres. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to cut the Avalanche Mortar entirely and go with the classic combo of 2 Gutter Runners, 2 Night Runners. And that's much more anti-air heavy, but I do like it. It's pretty good against Tzeentch, since Tzeentch has a lot of air units, especially if their Lord in the late game has to come in close. Like an Exalted Lord Change or Kairos tries to do some terror routes, at least you can shoot him. And if your Grayseer or Howling Warp Gale something on top of your Gutter Runners who are stealthed, that could do a lot of damage. Be pretty good. You could even get, honestly, a 5th 360 shooting unit and be fine. So there's 2 different ways to play that. I think the core of the build, though, is this, and I think you either add that. Okay, wait, so it's that. You either do the Avalanche Mortar or you do 2 Poison Gutter Runners, depending on how you want to play it. But either way, that's fine. So that's a defensive build that uses artillery. We saw a defensive build that just uses mid-range stuff. We saw an offensive build. I think you get the gist. So that's generally how you play Skaven. That's generally how you want to use the units. Skaven don't have a powerful Hero Hammer, so I would avoid Hero Hammer. But who knows what future patches will bring. We'll see. Right. I think that was it. That was a bit rambly, especially on the Lord option, but the Lord option is just so specific to the exact faction you're fighting and what patch you're fighting them on. But real quick, because I know that part was the most convoluted, I'll just do them real quick. Warlord is cheap and tanky. Throt is more expensive and tanky. He's much more of a combatant, while the Warlord's just trying to survive. Master Assassin has sucked forever, but if he was ever good, it's if his Shuriken allows him to kite. Tretch sucks unless they give him much more defensive buffs for the rest of his army. He himself is not tanky enough to justify it because spells still kill his ass easily. Grayseer is tanky and supportive for your entire army. He is generally the most versatile Lord. He is always good. That's why you've seen him since like Warhammer 2. Deathmaster Snitch is good if your opponent doesn't have a lot of cheap Lord sniping spells. He's a solid duelist, and he's good at clearing out crowds, so he's a sneaky little guy. Queek sucks, but if they ever buff him, he's good at dueling infantry-sized characters, which currently he sucks. Warlock Master is just Ikat Claw with faster regen, generally worse. Ikat Claw is more expensive than the Warlock Master, but he is a mobile caster that causes terror. Generally want him if you're facing a faction that has leadership issues and doesn't like being Lord sniped. And Lord Skrulk is amazing versus melee factions, terrible versus factions that can kill him at a range. All right, there's your Skaven build guide in the rambliest, terriblest form ever.
Roar. Subscribe, yes, yes.